Greetings, children of the screen. Your friendly neighborhood nerd scum here once again. Happy Friday the 13th, guys. If you guys didn't see it, I already posted my unboxing of the Camp Crystal Lake NECA accessory set from Friday the 13th, so make sure and check that video out. But as part of the continuing celebration, I wanted to talk to you guys about my top 3 favorite Friday the 13th installments. Now keep in mind, these are not the ones that I feel are the best installments necessarily. Not necessarily the best movies out of the bunch, but these are the 3 that I, for various reasons, love. Where if I'm going to put on a Friday the 13th movie to watch it, it will probably be one of these 3. Also, just a heads up, I am only covering movies titled Friday the 13th, so Jason X, Jason Goes to Hell, Jason vs. Freddy will not be included in this list. If you guys like this, then maybe later on, or maybe next year, I could do something involving those. So anyway, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. Number 3, Friday the 13th Part 3 3D. Released in 1983, running 95 minutes, and of course being rated R. This film is also directed by the previous film's director, Steve Miner, who also worked on the first film. It's written by Martin Kittrosser. And the basic premise of this one is slightly different than the previous 2. Instead of the kids going to a camp, they go to the farmhouse or lake house of a friend of theirs, and then from there the movie unfolds in a very similar way, with one of the main differences being that the young lady whose folks own the house, previously while at this house, had a traumatic encounter with a strange deformed man in the woods, who it turns out was Jason. So as the normal thing is going through, she is being confronted by the same person who had accosted her previously. Also, it's worth mentioning that she is someone who got away from Jason, and clearly that moment happened like within the time frame of the previous 2 films because the outfit's different and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to note that this final girl is a twofold final girl. She's actually escaped Jason twice, which is kind of awesome. Now, I really enjoy this movie. This is one of the earliest Friday the 13th movies that I saw. It's definitely the first one that I remember distinctly, which is kind of awesome in a few different ways. Number one, basically me getting on this movie, getting into it through this movie, Jason was the killer, which kind of established my long-held love of Jason Voorhees as kind of my favorite slasher killer. Also, this is the movie where they introduced the hockey mask, which again, by the time I'm watching these movies, the hockey mask is already the iconography of this entire franchise. So for me, as a kid, having seen all the box covers at the rental store, because for those of you who might be a little younger, back in the day, they were not just Blockbuster, there were like all these mom and pop chains of video rental stores. Hell, you'd go to the grocery store and you'd be able to rent movies at the grocery store, at gas stations. It was everywhere. So as a kid, all over the place, because Friday the 13th were big renters, I had seen all these hockey masks, and they had intrigued me and scared me, and it was cool. Also, I loved Casey Jones, so the idea of a guy in a hockey mask was automatically kind of awesome. So yeah, getting to see that moment where he finds the hockey mask and puts it on, even though that is kind of a throwaway moment because the hockey mask was never intended as the iconography, as a kid, I remembered that moment, I imbued that moment with a level of mythic resonance that really wasn't there, but it had a profound impact on me. Not to mention the final sequence of this movie where they reveal Jason's face and the final showdown, he's hung, he gets hit in the head with an axe, he just keeps coming. Man, that sequence is so awesome. While this movie maybe doesn't have some of the more, with the 3D, they have some kills that are a little bit more creative, but honestly, not seeing it in 3D and with what 3D was at the time, they're a little cheesy, which again, as a kid, they scared me, but it's also the first movie where we get to see, the powerhouse Jason. In the previous movie, Jason is a killer, he's a slasher killer, but in this movie we get to see the things that will become iconic tropes of Jason, crushing dudes' heads with his bare hands, throwing people through windows, throwing himself through windows, setting up bodies as diversions in order to either scare or to push people into areas where it's easier for him to hunt them. So yeah, I really love Friday the 13th Part 3, even without the 3D. I've watched it in the 3D, which is actually a little bit grating. I don't actually recommend that. But yeah, if I'm going to sit around and throw on Friday the 13th, out of the 3 movies that I'm going to put on, this is definitely one of them. I love this movie. It kind of started my love with the Friday the 13th franchise. And, I have nothing but, gracious joy for everything that came after that in terms of my experiences with it. And I owe it all to the viewing of this film. Number 2, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, originally released in 1988 and running 88 minutes, of course rated R. This movie is directed by John Carl Buechler and is written by Daryl Haney and Manuel Fidello. This film follows Tina, a young lady with psychic powers, who as a young girl was responsible for the death of her father at Camp Crystal Lake. So her mother, and her therapist have now returned to Camp Crystal Lake to try to deal with her trauma and help her focus her abilities. Unknown to them, her therapist and psychiatrist is actually also basically planning to exploit her to get famous off the book he's going to write. At the same time, next to them in the next the next house over, is a group of kids who are planning a surprise party for one of their friends, and they're going to just have a weekend of it. Guys, this movie's awesome, okay? That's the basic plot. It doesn't do it justice, alright? Now, I will admit, as an adult watching this movie, it has an abundant lack of gore, mostly because of the way that the rating system was in 1988 and how they were cracking down on these kind of films. But the basic setup, this movie gives Jason an actual adversary, someone to fight. Yeah, it's cheesy, she's got psychic powers and stuff, but the actress is fantastic. The way that she plays that character totally rocks, and you totally buy into, the whole scenario. Beyond that, this is our first appearance of Kane Hodder as Jason. And anyone who's a true Friday the 13th fan, I think, will openly admit that Kane Hodder is the ultimate Jason. He's the only, while I love some of the other portrayals of him, he is Jason to me, and always will be Jason to me. Not to mention, the makeup effects for Jason in this film are the best they've ever been. This is my favorite Jason look. This is the action figure I want. This is the statue I want. This is the poster I want. Because in this, they added every wound that Jason has ever received throughout any of the films. His mask is screwed up. You can see his body rotting from him, having been trapped underneath the water since Part 6. It is just awesome. It does suck that they cut out a bit of the gore and stuff, because the action sequences or the fights between Jason and the psychic girl in this movie are freaking amazing, and some of the kills are really cool, but you definitely, if you've seen the deleted scenes, which are very unremastered because they're so damaged and stuff, this movie originally was a lot gorier, and the action and violence, the way that the action and horror would have combined together to make a unique experience if they had not had to cut it all out would have been absolutely amazing. This movie is so much fun. Yes, it is the same thing of every other Friday the 13th movie, but they added this new element of the girl with psychic powers and all the drama that comes with that. Not to mention, the kids in the other cabin, they're fun and quirky, and, it was just fun. Really, and, most of the time when I'm going to watch Friday the 13th movie, that's what I gravitate towards. It's just that's fun, that's cool. And this movie has that in spades. Right on, guys. And my number one favorite Friday the 13th film is Friday the 13th Part 4, The Final Chapter. Released in 1984, running at 91 minutes and being, of course, rated R. This movie is directed by Joseph Zito and is written by Barney Cohen. This is my favorite. Like I said, I don't necessarily think it's the best, but it's my favorite. You got Corey Feldman. And again, as a kid watching this movie, having a kid in the movie, it's a horror movie that has a frickin' ride-along character. It's a slasher movie that has a ride-along character in it. And that ride-along character ends up saving the frickin' day. Not to mention the fact that, in this movie, amongst the cast, you have people like frickin' Crispin Glover, who's just being his weird, awesome, ridiculous self. Mind you, the toned-down younger version of that, but still just being awesome. The other actors in the movie are, again, this is a slasher movie. You don't expect a whole lot. Their characters aren't very well developed, but all of them play their archetypal characters very well. They're entertaining, and some of them are pricks who you definitely want to see go down. Beyond that, the effects in this movie are freaking phenomenal. It has some of my favorite effects, mostly in the final sequence between Corey Feldman and Jason. But that whole third act of this movie, as like Jason is chasing them, is some of, in my opinion, the most tense, most like action-packed kind of stuff out of the original Friday the 13th films. Like, it is just amazing. Not to mention, again, like, this is the film that actually kills Jason. Like, yeah, he comes back, and clearly things have happened to him in the previous movies that should have killed him. But for one reason or another, let's just say that his physiology, his deformities are different enough that he's managed to miss any vital organs. Like, at that point, he is still just a deformed, mentally challenged guy who is, like, obsessed with killing anyone who enters his territory. This movie actually kills him, which then why we have to bring him back as, like, a Frankenstein zombie in Part 6. Man, like, this movie is dope. This movie is awesome. It has everything you could possibly want out of a Friday the 13th movie and more. The reason I say more is, like, this movie's script is written much better than a lot of the others. It has more going on. Like, with the character Corey Feldman plays, like, this whole movie works also not only as a slasher movie, not only as your standard morality tale, but this also works as, like, a deranged coming-of-age story. Like, the way that young Corey Feldman is, like, spying on the naked girls and then, like, pretending to be asleep when his mom comes in. Like, you have, and then, like, the way that he builds these horrible monstrosities masks, but he's all, you know, like, there are all these different elements with his character that play into, like, this boy coming of age, which then is juxtaposed with Jason, the boy who never got the chance to come of age, and, like, what happened to him. And it's interesting seeing how, like, those two opposite sides of the coin colliding affect the young Corey Feldman character. But anyway, guys, this is my absolute favorite. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, if I'm going to put on a Friday the 13th movie, it is going to be this movie. I love it. It connected with me in a very special way, and it will always be my favorite. But anyway, guys, those are just my thoughts. And hey, I know what you're saying. Hold those comments right now. How could I not mention the original film, or Part 2, which are amazing films? In fact, I would go ahead and say that those two, while I still think that Part 4 maybe has a better script, in terms of the actual film, like, those two are probably the best 2 films in the franchise, in terms of, like, execution and, like, creative and inventive things that hadn't been really seen before in the way that they showed them to you. I even think that the second movie is probably a little better than the first one, just because it ups the tension and it ups the stakes, and, like, all the characters are a little bit more, they feel a little bit more real, and, like, you know. But yeah, I think that those 2 movies are probably the best 2 movies in the franchise. However, I saw those much later than all the other ones. Those were almost never available to rent, where I used to go and rent movies, Friday the 13th movies. I didn't see them until much, much later. And while I respect them and I love those movies, they just don't spark the same feeling of, like, fun. Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's just the bias of the order I saw the movies in, but while I really respect them and I really like them, they're almost never the first movie I gravitate to when it comes to the Friday the 13th films. But, you know, guys, as with all these videos, that's just my opinion. What are your top 3 favorite Friday the 13th films? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you like this video, please leave a like and share it with some friends. That's more important than ever, with everything that YouTube's been changing up on us small YouTubers. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe and hit that little bell so you can get notifications on all the dope content I'll have coming out in the future. Thank you very much, guys, and I hope you all have a horribly frightening Friday the 13th. Nerd Scum, out.